Hello, everybody. Good afternoon from the Netherlands to the second webinar of this year. We're running a little bit behind, but we'll catch up later. Today, we're going to talk about NIS2 Directive, how to prepare for it, and highlighting some of the experiences that Joseph had with the NIS1 Directive. Next slide, please.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, there we are. So this is the agenda for today. Normally I'm also the button master, but Joseph, in this case, you're both the headline speaker as well as the button master. At least I will still be the timekeeper. I will be setting the stage for the presentation of Joseph today. After the presentation of Joseph, we have possibility for a Q&A. We reserve a lot of time for Q&A, especially on this topic, because I think there will be a lot of questions. So as from now, if you look at the right bottom of your screen, you can see the questions tab. So from this moment on, it's okay to ask questions. Either I will jump in to Joseph's presentation, or we will save your questions for the end of the webinar. So next slide, please. So who are we? CISO Tribe, a group of current and prospect cybersecurity leaders. We come together once a month, and then we talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly in cybersecurity. Looking at the next page, Joseph, please. We have defined some focus areas which we will be focusing on for the next couple of months. Some of the activities have already been done. Artificial intelligence, we did an event together with TNO. We'll be doing another event together with Etsy. NIST, we did an event together with NIST actually, and we'll be doing another one with them somewhere before summer to discuss the final draft that they've put together. And some other activities on third-party risk, very connected, I think, Joseph, to your presentation today as well on the NIS2 Directive, and some activities on Agile and DevSecOps that we've been doing in the past and will continue to do in the future. So introducing our speaker for today. That's you. Yeah. So Joseph Mager is currently the deputy CISO with NS. He studied applied mathematics at the Eindhoven University of Technology, if that's the right way to put it in English. Started his career in software engineering research and moving towards information security in the early 2000s. And within the NS, he defined the security roadmap, also set up an implementation program for realizing that roadmap, and has influenced some major outsourcing projects to include security. Within NS, he has also set up the information risk management group. And after that, he took up the position of information security for a business unit and specializes in topics like privacy and risk management. He's a frequently asked for speaker. So throughout his career, he presented at various conferences for the Information Security Forum, which is probably well known if you're in the CISO role, the Real Cybersecurity Summit, and last year's NISA Annual Security Conference. Well, Joseph, basically, you're a very smart person. We can see that. But the main reason that we invited Joseph today is because he's in a unique position. Because of his long-term establishment within the Dutch railways, he has both experience with the implementation of the NIS1 Directive, or the original NIS Directive, and is currently also leading the preparations for NIS2. So I think, Joseph, that puts you in a unique position to discuss some of the pitfalls, some of the challenges, some of the experiences that you already faced during the first directive, and now also giving us some guidance how to prepare for the NIS2. So, Joseph, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Wim, and everyone also for attending this seminar, this webinar. It's again a pleasure to be giving a presentation, especially on this important topic. Although this is a virtual meeting, I was used to giving virtual meetings during the Corona time, but nowadays also physical meetings are, of course, again started. But nevertheless, it's also a pleasure to give this presentation to you via this conference facilities. And the title actually of my talk is 1.5 years on track with the NIS1, and approximately 1.5 years to go for the NIS2. I will come to that later on a little bit about the timing, but first of all, let's have a look at the situation until 2021. That's already some time ago. On the left-hand side, you see actually the rail network of the Netherlands, and on the right-hand side, you see the rail network of Cyprus and Malta. And as you can observe, there is no actually, to be frank, to convey the message. But the point being actually that before 2021, although the rail sector was actually mentioned in the NIS1 as a sector which could be under the NIS1 actually, in the Netherlands, the situation was that there was no allocation of the rail sector to the NIS or the Dutch implementation of that, which is called the WBNI. The other exceptions were actually Cyprus and Malta, but as you can see, they don't have any rail network, so it's actually useless to have them actually under the NIS2 Directive. But in the Netherlands, it wasn't. We do have a rail network, and we were not under the NIS1 actually. Looking at that situation actually, and this is a bit awkward or maybe a bit difficult story to tell somehow. On one hand, of course, you can argue that legislation might be difficult, might be cumbersome. But on the other hand, also, it could help actually improve cybersecurity within your sector. Having observed that actually in the rail sector, also in the Netherlands, we needed some improvement for cybersecurity, and also having observed that we were not under the NIS Directive yet, and being of the opinion that would be a nice tool to improve the cybersecurity for the sector itself, we embarked on discussing indeed the position of the rail sector within the critical sectors, first of all, and later on within the WBNI or the NIS Directive. And that was not actually a decision only taken from the information security point of view, but it was also communicated and discussed with our board of directors. So they were also involved in taking a more active approach to fostering and being subject to this real cybersecurity legislation. So just a few steps in this process. We did do, of course, guided by the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management, which is actually the ministry in the Netherlands which provides us the right to operate our trains on the track. There was carried out an overall risk analysis for the rail sector, looking at what kind of influence does the rail sector have on the environmental, so actually the societal effect of that if there are major disruptions within the rail sector. Based on this analysis, it was determined that the rail sector itself became what you could call critical, so it became critical entity or vital in Dutch, and that was then done in March 2020. Based on that decision, as a follow-on step, and as became operator of essential services subject to the NIS Directive, actually dus the WBNI, the Wet Beveiliging Netwerk Informatiesysteem in Dutch, that was at the end of December 2021. And that is actually more or less 1.5 years ago. And finally, there is also what's important, a ministerial ruling, which was actually applicable to all the sectors which are under the guidance of the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management. So also on, for instance, the road transport and also the water sector is subject to this regulation, which gives more specific rules and indication what you have to do as an operator of essential services if you are under the regulation of this ministry. This law actually became applicable to the NS only in the beginning of this year. But of course, since we knew we were already being subject to that regulation, we already provided input why this was under development, I think already about 2 years ago. And that's another message I want to convey, that you can also, as a cybersecurity professional, not only look into legislation as maybe a tool to improve the state of affairs within your sector, but of course you have to also take an active approach to see, okay, is it going into the right direction? And probably that also has to do with the maturity of a company. If you, of course, are embarking on cybersecurity initially, you still have a lot to do and to deal with within your company. But the longer you are, the more mature you are, actually, you envisage and you also observe that you also have to manage your ecosystem. So in our case, we have to manage the cybersecurity within the rail sector, and means to do that is, for instance, by having influence or taking influence on the legislation in that sector. So what did we do actually to implement the NIS1? And probably most of you who are already in cybersecurity for some time, I presume, know this by heart almost. It's not really a rocket science. It's just doing what you might call the normal stuff. But we also took the opportunity actually to give a number of initiatives which we already were embarking on, to give them an additional boost actually. For instance, we do have a cybersecurity management system. We did have that, but it was not really up to date. It was not really consolidated. So we took the opportunity of the implementation of the NIS Directive to actually redesign our cybersecurity management system, or information security management system, you also might call it, based on the analysis of the regulations which I mentioned. So the overall NIS Directive, the Dutch implementation of this NIS Directive, so the WBNI, but also this ministerial regulation which was applicable to our sector. Looking at this cybersecurity management system, just on a side track, we also use this one actually to have another part of a company, although that wasn't part of the NIS scope. We also use the same information security management system or cybersecurity management system to reach certification for that part of our business. So what it boils down to is actually we do have an overarching cybersecurity management system, and we use that for various domains within our company to achieve the goals which are actually necessary within that part or within that domain of our company. Then actually I think that the major part, and probably you will also be running in that if you are subject to the NIS2 and not to the NIS1, is actually about scoping. So, and it's also still the discussion which we have, for instance, with the ministry, is what kind of processes and what kind of assets belonging to this or supporting these processes are subject to the NIS Directive. In our case, actually, we determined together with our ministry criteria, which said, okay, if your normal operation of trains has this effect on society, and in our case, you can think about how many passengers are affected and for which time duration they are affected by this disruption, then indeed you are above the thresholds or the criteria which are associated with the NIS Directive. So that means, in fact, that based on these criteria, we determined which kind of business processes, and in our case, it's mainly about running the trains, and which kind of assets which are belonging to these processes or supporting these processes are subject to the NIS Directive. And for instance, in our case, the systems which we use to do the logistics of our personnel of our trains, these are indeed under the scope of the NIS Directive. But on the other hand, just opposite to that, for instance, the systems which we currently use, for instance, for selling tickets, or for instance for providing coffee in the retail shops, they are not part of the scope for the NIS Directive currently for us. So actually determining the scope and determining which processes you are in scope and which are not in scope, I think that's one of the major challenges, but also one of the major tasks you have to carry out. And then based on that, of course, we do a risk analysis. I do have some more details on how we do that currently. And after the risk analysis has been carried out, we, of course, treat the risks as normally. And finally, it's, of course, the process of notification. So if there are major incidents, cybersecurity incidents, we have to notify, in our case, of course, the National Cybersecurity Center, but also, of course, the oversight party in our case is that's ELT, the Inspection for Luchtvaart and Transport. And we also had an audit already. And of course, as you all know, audits can be quite cumbersome to sometimes. But again, also you can take it as an opportunity to get some better grip on which areas you are performing okay and which areas need some improvement. In fact, the audit in our case was carried out, the first more or less a global audit, you might say a general audit was carried out end of last year. And this proved actually that indeed the approach we have taken, but also the cybersecurity management system we have set up is up to par. So that was actually a positive result of this audit in our case. And looking at the relationship with your external overview party, you might also say start talking with them at an early stage so that you also get a better understanding, okay, how do they approach this directive? Will it be very strict in oversight, or are they more or less in guiding the sector to maturity? So it really also depends upon the party which will be doing the audits at your company. But then in general, of course, getting in touch with them at an early stage and getting a relation, I think that's quite important also for everyone.
Question there, Joseph, too, actually. The audit that you did, was that an audit specifically directed towards the NIS2? And the other question is, if you look at your 3 lines of defense, and maybe your internal audit organization, do you involve them in these types of projects also in the scoping phase, or when do you involve them?
Yeah, maybe first of all, this audit which is mentioned, the internal audit actually which is mentioned here, was carried out by ourselves more or less. And of course, you can say that's doing your own work, but the reason behind it is actually that we also use the same cybersecurity management system for the other part of the company which was certified. So actually, we already had some proof in our hands that the cybersecurity management system itself is up to par and indeed adheres to all the requirements from the ISO 27001. So that's why we didn't do that much internal audit in that part. The ILT audit, for the audit part, the oversight party, that was indeed an external audit, and actually that proved indeed that at least based on their audit, that the things which we are doing are in the right direction. In general, of course, if you look into our cybersecurity management system itself, we do have also internal audit steps in there, and that will be carried out in our case by indeed internal audit department. So actually, it's in our case a twofold procedure. Internal audit audits the overall cybersecurity management system. So that's the third line, looking in the work of the second line.
Yeah.
And we, as second line, the CISO office, or and the cybersecurity is called nowadays, audits actually the implementation within the various domains, the various business units. So then the second line looks at the first line. So that's more or less the approach we have taken. It's a stepwise approach for that.
Right, thanks.
So looking at the bit more at the way we approached the risk analysis, we did do also here 2 steps actually, and that's also currently under discussion. Just I will also share our feedback about that. We do have a process-related business impact assessment that is looking actually at, as stated, the impact on the business if a process is disrupted by cybersecurity causes. And it leads to 2 parts actually. One of course, it really indeed gives the impact, but also it provides which kind of applications are important for that process in such a way that indeed you have to do a more detailed analysis for that applications, or more or less which applications are within the NIS scope. Based on the selection of applications, for these applications, we do carry out detailed threat analysis, which actually gives you more insight on the probability part of the risk. So, and that's more or less how we combine it. So the process business impact is more or less looking at the impact itself. So the results of a breach or a cyber incident, and the threat analysis looking at the probability. And together, of course, you can then get the overall risk. And of course, then you determine whether the risk is acceptable or not, or whether you have to include additional measures. But not looking only at the instrument, but also what they achieve. Especially talking about the business impact on process level gives you a tool, a means to discuss the impact, but also the importance of doing cybersecurity with the business owners or product owners if you do a DevOps approach. And doing the threat analysis, the DKA, it's called in Dutch, it gives you also a means to communicate and discuss with the developers what kind of threat they are and how their application can be impacted by those threats. So it's also a tool, a means to communicate the importance of cybersecurity to your stakeholders. And looking at the risk treatment, we still have our baseline measures, which are already quite old, but still not that really quite good. Then there are compliance-related measures, which actually are also in the NIS1, but also in this regulation from the ministry. And on top of that, you say, okay, do we need additional measures? These are actually risk-based measures in that case. What we are currently discussing, indeed, this process BIA is, okay, is it really a right tool to do that? I think it is really a right tool, but the precondition which you need for that is, of course, a good process description. So you need a good description of your business processes. And unfortunately, in some areas, we do have that, but you don't have that for all areas. So that's why we have to cater for also the situation that, although this is, I think, our preferred approach, if there's no good process description, you have to make other choice, I think, in approaching the risk analysis. But nevertheless, I think it's good to do it with process owners, to our owners of the business processes, to get them give them a better understanding of what is cybersecurity and why is cybersecurity important to their business process. And it's also good to discuss with the developers because they're mostly functionality oriented. Just let me be frank about that. But if they understand why it's important for their application, they also are better equipped to improve the cybersecurity of the applications they are taking care of. So, and now we are diving into the NIS2, if there are no any questions about the NIS1, but I have some slides on the NIS2. I don't know whether you are aware of what it is within the NIS2, but just to give you a short recap about it. Actually, it's already into force, so more or less it now has to be translated into national regulation or legislation, so in national legislation. And that's also one of the main difference within the GDPR. Just a short word on that. The GDPR is a regulation. That means actually everything which is at the UE level is national law, so it has to be translated. If you look into a directive like the NIS, for instance, then it has to be translated into national law, and that, of course, on one hand, it's good because then, of course, the nations can have some influence on how it's applied. But for companies working nationally, that might be a pain in the ass because, in fact, what it boils down to, national implementations might differ, and that leads to actually imbalance in the European market. And in fact, the NIS2 is one first step actually in dealing with the differences of implementation within the various countries of the NIS1. So that's also the reason why, for instance, the situation which I started with, that NS was not under the NIS1 actually at the start, that has been dealt with because, in fact, the new NIS2 explicitly states every company within the sectors mentioned in the NIS2, I come to that later on, will be subject to the NIS2 or its national implementation, unless it's too small. And this is indeed the size cap rule which is provided here. So actually, the smaller companies under 50 employees or under 10 million euro turnover are not subject to the NIS2, unless again they play a critical role. So even a small company which has a very critical service for society might be subject to the NIS2 as well. But as a rule of thumb, the larger companies active in the sectors which I will mention later on, they will be subject to the NIS2. And one other difficulty or change is, in fact, in the previous one, the government had to appoint a company organization as an operator of essential services. In the new NIS2, you have to do that yourself, more or less. So you have to interpret the law and say, okay, yes, indeed, I'm subject to the NIS2, and you have to register yourself. So that's actually a big exercise which we're doing right now to see whether we indeed are subject to the NIS2. Of course we are, but I'll just explain a little bit more about that. This is an overview of the various sectors which actually are subject, and I hope you can see it. The dark blue is actually the current NIS1, and the lighter blue is added to that one. And as you can see, transport, air, rail, water, and road is indeed part of NIS1 and NIS2. But for instance, the manufacturing of other transport equipment will become a critical sector, other critical sector. And you might say, why is it important for you, for instance? Well, the point being that we are not only transporting people by rail, but we also are overhauling trains, for instance. And in general, we of course also provide services via digital means. So actually, our scoping exercise is really looking into, okay, all these areas, do we have activities which fall within that sector? And should they also be subject to the NIS, but not to the transport part, but maybe to the other part? So another example of that is, for instance, we also have, of course, the retail shops, as already explained. So also food is currently becoming under subject to the NIS2 Directive. But as we observed, for instance, the food distribution, or actually the distribution centers themselves, they are subject, but the outlets, so the shops, are not subject to the NIS2. So that's how we are analyzing, actually, at this moment in time, which part of our companies, which part of our processes will be subject to the NIS2. Then, of course, and this is a nice overview made by a colleague of mine, and that's also another point, actually, which I would like to make. We do have some, of course, we are a bigger company, but some of you might also be in a bigger company. And we have some lawyers or some people who are really interested in looking to cybersecurity legislation. And that's why they are building what you could call a cybersecurity law center of competence. So there are 2 or 3 people, not that big, but at least they are, which are looking into the upcoming and existing legislation with respect to cybersecurity. And I think really that's important because a lot of legislation is coming along. Not only this actually, the NIS2, but I will later come on to the Cyber Resilience Act, for instance, the CRA, which also is important. So a lot of European legislation with respect to cybersecurity, or which touches upon cybersecurity, is under development. And I think that the landscape for cybersecurity, especially with respect to legislation, is changing quite rapidly, although it's legislation. So, well, what is rapid in this case? 1 or 2 years is then in that case rapid, of course. But in general, what you can see is, in fact, that the terms are more or less the same. But what is also interesting, actually, is that that the recipients of the services are explicitly mentioned in the NIS2. Of course, if you look to the NIS1, it's also about ensuring the continuity of your services, which of course are also for the recipients. But you see actually that it's more or less like the GDPR, that you also have to look at the impact of the incidents on your customers. And that's a bit different than, I think, just looking at the impact of services when you're looking from a business perspective, or only from a business perspective. Then another part which is actually changing with respect to the NIS2 is actually that what you could call the baseline measures, or the measures you have to take in any case, there are more of these. The NIS1 had, I think, 1 or 2 or 3 like that. But unlike, for instance, the GDPR, which is only more or less about principles, in the NIS2, you have explicit requirements with respect to cybersecurity measures you have to take. For instance, human resource security, which is not highlighted, is also a quite important topic, of course, but also access control, policy, and asset management. And again, cryptography. But also what is important, that cybersecurity training is also mentioned explicitly, and not only cybersecurity training for, let's call it, your normal staff, but in another part of the NIS2, it's specified that also your managing or your board of directors has to educate itself on cybersecurity. So it's not just a freebie. They don't have to be informed. No, they have to be trained. And you have to take care of that. And another major part is, of course, about supply chain security. And that's really, I think, on one hand, good. On the other hand, it's worrying me a little bit, because indeed we do get the obligation to look into the cybersecurity of our direct suppliers, which of course we already do a little bit. But I think due to the NIS2, every company which is subject to the NIS2, and it will be a lot actually, will start doing that. And this might be quite some work for everyone to do that individually as an individual company, which might lead that on one hand, everyone is sending out, for instance, questionnaires to their suppliers. But since some of you are also suppliers to some of the NIS2 parties, you will also be receiving assessments and questionnaires. So probably there will be quite some time that everyone is talking about, okay, what questionnaires to send, how to approach that. And that's why we are looking to means, for instance, in our sector to reuse, for instance, something like which has been done in the Brainpond region or within the Harbor region, with, for instance, a model like cyber rating, the Sierra model, something like that. So a general questionnaire which everyone is using. So it's about NIS2, and also what's quite important is that's an all-hazard approach. So you also have to look to the physical environment, which is also quite important, of course, nowadays. But it also interacts with another directive which is coming along. It's called the Critical Entity Resilience Directive, the CER directive, which is actually not targeting cybersecurity, but all other risks. And they have this similar flavor. But I think also you could reach out, for instance, to the persons working on physical security to see whether you combine, for instance, effort in implementing NIS2 with the preparation or the implementation of the CER directive, which actually has a similar timeline than the NIS2 has. And maybe also the other 1.5 year, that's actually the other point I would like to make. October 2024, then it will become into full force. That means we only have 1.5 year, more or less, to prepare, which is also quite a limited time frame.
One question there, Joseph, on the supply chain risk that you just mentioned. You're looking at a specific solution for that. But of course, you just mentioned the ecosystem at the beginning of your presentation. Yeah. You're part of the ecosystem. You cannot manage the ecosystem yourself. You can only be part of the ecosystem. Right. So you would select one specific solution, but your vendor, for instance, that you would be working with, will also have third parties, right? And they may use a different type of questionnaire or a different type of solution. Is this something that you're looking at, and especially the risk and the benefits of doing this?
Well, we are starting the discussion within the sector first, actually. So, for instance, we do have an ISAC, Information Analysis Center for the railway in the Netherlands. And in fact, within that group, we are discussing, okay, how do we see this problem and how we are going to tackle that? So what we hope to do is actually that we can assemble the forces within the rail sector in Holland. But after that, or maybe just after that, we will start also discussing the same topic with, for instance, the suppliers within the Netherlands to see, okay, how do they see that this problem? So, and I hope indeed that we can use similar tools or similar models for addressing that, but that's only within the Netherlands. Yeah. Since we are in a European market, we also have to look into Europe, and you see some initiatives, but quite limited in tackling the same point. But I think for the European case, legislation probably is, maybe not the way to go, but it's also part of the solution in this case. And I will come to that at the end of the presentation, also on this topic.
Yeah, this is really a challenge, because it's limited to a geographical area. That's one. But also, I could imagine that even looking at it from a sectoral approach, is that one specific vendor could offer services to different types of organization that are subjected to the NIS2 in different types of sectors as well. Huh?
Correct. Yeah. So it will be it will be a very interesting time. Let's call it like that. The coming years, especially on this topic, and probably it will be quite some hassle the first years. But I hope that there will be some consolidation the coming years, especially since probably most of the companies will start struggling with this topic, and that means also there will be a need for solutions. So there will be also a market for solutions. So I assume that also some parties will see that and also will start developing solutions for that, or will improve on the solutions they currently have.
Yeah.
So then about notification itself, as you can see, and that's also a bit of a change actually with respect to the NIS1, that you not only have to look at the operational disruption, that's actually in red, but you also have to look at the financial loss for your entity. And that's really a new wording in the NIS2. So that means that you also have to really see, okay, what kind of thresholds do you have for financial losses? But also, and I've already stated before, you also have to look to the damage the disruption will cause to your customers or to other stakeholders which are affected by that. And so that's one part. So in fact, looking at the incidents which you have to notify upon, they are actually, the scope for that is broadening. That's actually the result of these two red sentences. And next to that, also the process for notification has been more strict. So within 24 hours, you have to give a first warning. Then you have to do incident notification within 72 hours, and not least, but also you have to provide a final report after 1 month. And this is also really quite some work, depending, of course, upon how many notifications you have to do. And what we actually are discussing right now also with our ministry, what will be the thresholds for that. Because on one hand, of course, the notification is to learn from incidents which are happening within these various sectors which are subject to the NIS directive. So that's why you want to have the threshold not too high. But on the other hand, every notification you do brings on administrative burden. So that means why you would like to have not too low. So finding the right balance between reaping the learning benefits of notification and not providing too much burden to every sector. I think that's still also something which has to be thought about and has to be found out how to approach that one. And another thing, actually, it's also new with respect to the NIS2 notification is that you not only have to notify to, in our case, national cybersecurity and the competent authority, so in IRT in our case, but also to the recipients of your services. And that's actually similar also to the GDPR notification process. So also there you have to notify, of course, depending upon the impact on the loss, also your data subjects. You get a similar obligation from the notifications obligations from the NIS2, also to notify, let's call it the clients, the customers of your services. So also this increases the burden, I think, on the companies for implementing NIS2. So what are we doing actually? What are we doing actually as a result of that? We are looking actually in the various areas which we have and looking into, okay, do we have to improve upon that? So our current view is that for the cybersecurity management system, the information security management system which we have in place, we don't need any extension, we don't need any improvement. Sorry for the typo tones in this one, but so we don't need any improvement on that one. As already explained, the main part is looking in the scope. So we again revisiting the scope. Do we have activities within the various sectors which are mentioned in the NIS2? Are they indeed subject to the NIS2? And what we have to do about that one? And we assume currently that indeed the scope for NIS2 will be a bit broader than the scope we are doing for NIS1 at this moment in time. So that means also that there will be an additional implementation effort for the broadened scope. The risk analysis process will not change. Maybe already we will tackle the problem I indicated earlier. So if there's no business process which you can build upon, how do you do that then? But of course, we have to carry out the risk analysis. And if you look into the risk treatment, I think that the main focus, and I already more or less touched about that, is about looking into the cybersecurity of direct suppliers, managing the capabilities of the management. Sorry, capabilities management, the management of the capabilities of the management. So actually looking for that indeed the board of directors and the management has the right capabilities with respect to cybersecurity. And it might be, but that's really up to also, first of all, up to the European Commission. It might be that specific sectors will be subject to mandatory certification. So that means that it will not be voluntary anymore to certify for specific sectors, but they will have to do that based on the outcome of the discussion within the European Union on this one. And talking about notification and compliance, as already stated, the notification process is stricter. So actually you have to reach indeed this timing and you have to notify your customers. And of course, it might also be necessary or useful. The upper management will be accountable, will be liable. So will be personally liable if there are really big mistakes within respect to cybersecurity. And which I didn't mention, of course, the fines. The fines are comparable, will be comparable to the GDPR fines. So it's more or less what it boils down to. And I think that's also looking at the NIS2. It gets more into the direction, although it's not a regulation, it gets more into the direction of a regulation. So it's stricter with respect to the various aspects, also about the liability, for instance. And it might be, although that's also not really, maybe not feasible, it might be that the next step will be turning the NIS2 into a regulation, although NIS2 touched upon national security, and the nation states have independence on that topic. So that's why also it's quite difficult for the European Commission to turn the NIS2 into a regulation like the GDPR. But what you do see is that indeed it's becoming more and more strict. So the freedom, actually, you might call it, for the various states within the European Union to give their own interpretation, that's decreasing. And of course, then the overall uniformity is increasing.
Joseph, when you were talking about certification, is that an actual certification against the NIS2 directive?
No, it's just the ISO certification. So they have to look into certification schemes.
Okay. And maybe one other question from Diana from the audience. Does NIS2 address quantum computing in any sense?
Not as far as I know. I think that there are various, of course, a lot of different discussions about quantum computing. But I think that cryptography is mentioned. I'd have to look into the various topics to see whether it's really mentioned explicitly, but not really in the main text itself.
Okay, thanks.
And this is just what I touched upon. Actually, there's a lot of legislation coming along, also with respect to cybersecurity from the European Commission. And what you see is actually that on one hand, it gives you additional burdens. On the other hand, it can also be part of a solution to get better grip on cybersecurity, either within the sector or cybersecurity of your suppliers. So, for instance, looking at the NIS2, the railway undertakings that our company actually and infrastructure managers like ProRail, they are subject to the NIS2. But also a lot of our, let's call it our supply chain, for instance, digital infrastructure, ICT service management, but also the manufacturers of rolling stock are subject to the NIS2. That means, in fact, that part of our supply chain is also covered by the NIS2, and we can more or less lean on them being subject to the NIS2. Then another important legislation which comes into sight is the Cyber Resilience Act. That's more product-oriented legislation. And it states about essential requirements for digital products. And that's actually everything you might think of, which has some digital element in there. And it talks about requirements for the life cycle of the product, but also talks about vulnerability handling. So that means, for instance, that it might be that companies who bring products with digital elements onto the European market, they will be obliged to provide patches, security patches, for at least for maximum 5 years, or for the lifetime of the product if that's shorter. But also there will be conformity assessments for critical products, and the critical products are products, for instance, used by operator of essential services like we are. And there can either be a self-assessment, that's the lighter version of that, but for more critical products, it will be a certification again. If you look in certification, there are certification schemes under development, like the Common Criteria certification scheme for products, but also a certification scheme for cloud services. And that brings me actually to the question which Wim stated, okay, how are you going to manage your supply chain? Probably you will first of all use some instruments like questionnaires or cyber rating companies to get a grip on the security posture of your suppliers. But it might also be that for very important parts of your supply chain, you either will require certification, or from a legislation point of view, it will already be required to have certification. So you really have to make an analysis of your supply chain, which is what are the critical elements. Are there legislation which I can build my trust upon, or do I need to take additional measures? So it will become a mix actually of certification, questionnaires, and looking into let's call it regulated cybersecurity from the overall regulations which are in place.
From your perspective, Joseph, what would you have preferred the Commission to have taken a little bit more of prescriptive approach here, or do you prefer the freedom that you have in your current role?
Well, I think that the first one is better at this moment in time. Although, and that's of course we also discussing in the Netherlands, is indeed that it might be helpful to have some more direction. And that's why indeed we used, of course, this ministerial regulation for providing the direction in our own company. But having an overarching baseline, for instance, is quite difficult, especially if you see how diverse the various sectors are which are subject to the NIS2. So I think that looking at the sector itself and coming to an understanding what do we need for our sector, and based on that looking into standards, etc., I think that's a better approach than having an overarching, very strict standardization framework for all the various sectors. Okay, then this is the last slide I have. What did we learn? Probably that's not much of a surprise to you, but determining the scope is quite crucial because indeed that determines which parts of your company are subject to this regime of oversight, and also proving to the, for instance, to the oversight organization that you are in charge and that you have everything under control. So it's crucial to do that, to make it not too big, but also not too small, of course. It's also quite difficult because indeed you need also the conversation with, first of all, with this oversight organization, but also, for instance, with other partners within your sector, because it's more or less also a sectorial approach in this part. Maybe an open door, but in fact, the NIS requirements are not really new in general. I think not for security in general, but it provides additional motivation to do an extra step, or to redesign, or to revamp various parts of your security framework. The next one is, I didn't touch upon that quite good actually, but to explain, we are currently implementing the NIS2 Directive via the line of business. So that means we don't have any project or program, but we are trying to do in the day-to-day business, do the implementation of the NIS directive. The GDPR, we did do a program approach, and the reason behind it was more or less also that for we thought the GDPR was bigger for implementation, and in fact it was at that moment in time, but also that everyone was talking about the GDPR, I think a couple of years ago. So it was also quite easy to make a program of that, because everyone is asking, what are we doing about the GDPR? Yes, let's make a program of that. For the NIS, we try to do that via the line. It has some benefits, but also some drawbacks, and probably we'll do the NIS2 again via program approach. Not only because it gets better attention, more attention, but also because it probably is a bit bigger than the NIS one we're already implementing. But also, since the NIS2 is getting more and more attention in the marketplace, probably we get the same kind of hype around the NIS2 as we have as we did have about the GDPR. And as already explained, looking at the NIS2, the main point is actually talking about the scope once again, but also talking about cybersecurity in the supply chain. So that ends my presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Joseph. Really interesting. Also to see your perspective and your experiences so far. One other question, maybe also because now there are a lot more different organizations and entities that are doing this exercise for the first time. Could you elaborate a little bit because I think the ILT is your overseeing body, right? That's what you mentioned. How does that work in a practical sense? Do you have your own point of contact there when it comes to um, the overseeing function? If you are actually complying with the directive, do they take a proactive approach? Will it be mostly based on your experience? After excuse my French, the shit hits the fence after an incident. What's your experience with that?
Yeah, actually, and that's also a bit mixed. Actually, our own experience is quite good. But with the ELT then in this case, but of course there are more oversight organizations. But other parties in the same sector have quite different experience. So it probably also depends a bit upon which contact points you have. In our case, actually, what we did do, as already explained, we reached out to the ministry, but also to ELT in at an early stage to see, okay, what's happening, how you are going to approach that. And they took the opportunity actually to inform us more or less in an information session about, okay, what their approach will be. And they are stating, and I hope that indeed that's the case, that they are not really in the game of penalizing, but they are in the game of improving cybersecurity within the sector. And actually, that's also our concern, but also our objective, actually. So as long as that's the case, then I think we are in the right field. And what they do actually more or less from approach, they start with an overall, let's call it more a general audit, where you actually looking at documentation and looking at and having an interview about 3 hours in more in-depth interview about various topics within that overall approach. And later on, that probably will be at the end of this year. It's more diving into a specific topic, but then to it full depth actually. So that's what their approach. I don't know what other oversight organizations have a different approach, but at least how they do that. And of course, the general overview is not easy, but okay, of course, we can also tell about how we are doing that. So that was not too bad. I'm really looking forward to the deep dive they are going to do, because then we're going into the details. And as you all know, it's true, the devil is in the details, also at our company. So you will find things which are not really fine, but well, that's why we do an audit.
Yeah, that makes sense. So maybe your position is a little bit different, of course, as the Dutch railways, because from what I understand, it may be hundreds or even thousands of organizations that would. It's impossible for every organization to have that type of proactive approach to each and every company. I would imagine. I'm not sure, but
no, that's right. But there are two categories, and forgive me. I think I'm just the critical and essential, something like that. Is it? There are two different categories. So and in the NIS2. And the first category, actually, they indeed are subject to onto this oversight from the start, but the other ones are only exposed. So that's actually after the fact. So not all the entities which are subject to the NIS2 will have this ex ante oversight.
Yeah, great. I have another one. Again, of course, on the supply chain, as we had expected prior to the prior to the activity. From Diana again, how many levels deep are organizations supposed to go in the supply chain? Can you elaborate on this requirement from a business point of view? Good question.
Yeah, well, actually, I think that was also one of the changes. Actually, it's to only your direct suppliers. So the first tier, I don't know how you call it, but only your direct suppliers. Of course, that relieves the burden a little bit. But in general, I think that, of course, we will require our direct suppliers to have some oversight on their suppliers. So that will be a means to have also some indication and some oversight on your second-tier suppliers. But from a legal perspective, it's only the first tier, so the direct suppliers. And if you look from a business point of view, I think what we probably will start be doing is looking more at the risk, of course, of the various suppliers with respect to cybersecurity. And it might be, but just with stressing, there might be that some parties will not be actually will not be accepted to have them anymore as a supplier. But I think that will take some time before we get there, because indeed, then we also have to prove indeed that there's really a big risk. So it might be that cybersecurity is becoming now. It is that cybersecurity is becoming more and more important. It's not the only point to select suppliers, but it will become a much more important part of the selection process that it has been up till now.
Yeah, and that was one other question that I had as well. I think also with like with many other organizations, we all rely on SME type of companies that bring us innovative solutions, right? Not only in cybersecurity, but for the entire organization. And the question there that I raised there is are we going to get to a point where it's almost impossible to onboard these types of organization that do not have the back office and the legal support to fill out all these documents and are able to prove that they're able to provide a service to a NIS2 subjected entity?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that might be a problem, but I think indeed that, and again, it's about risk. If it's indeed in the heart of your business process, which is indeed then also subject to this legislation, then probably you will be very careful about that. But if it's more on the outskirts of your business processes or business, then it might be acceptable. But of course, indeed, you have to make sure that they don't touch your data, etc. Of course, you have to take care of that one. But that's actually the normal way of working within cybersecurity. Actually, determine the risk, and based on that. And of course also the opportunity, the chance of using them, and that has to be weighed against each other.
Yeah, so basically you're saying not to dive too deep into compliance mode and forget about the risk-based.
No, actually we still sell it, and I think it still has to be a risk-based approach. That's actually the heart of it.
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you. That was the last question, Joseph.
Okay,
thank you again. Maybe just looking at the upcoming events, I think on the next slide. So past, present, and future. Some of these are already been covered. Today's webinar, we had some questions from the audience. Yes, we will share the video, and Joseph, if I'm correct, we will also share the presentation. That was okay with you?
Sure, yeah.
We have some activities scheduled that I think you will find very interesting, participating in this activity. Today we only talked about vendors. It becomes even more interesting when we talked about software supply chain risks and software bill of materials. This is our first next upcoming event in June. Another one on third-party risk, together with Tom, Group CISO at UCB, and Ivan, Group CISO at WebHelp. This will be a closed event, but we'll try to share some of the high-level conclusions directly after that. And we continue to work with some of the other topics of interest on artificial intelligence, together with Etsy after summer. Diana actually asking some of the questions today. From Accenture, but also a contributor member to First about CVSS. And we have another event scheduled together with NIST, hopefully before June. I think this was my last slide, but I don't remember anymore, Joseph. So surprise me.
No, it's the last slide.
Yeah, so this is it. Thank you again, Joseph. I already told you before. It's quite difficult. It's never difficult to find a consultant or a vendor to present something. But I know that you're extremely busy, and your contributions are very much appreciate it. So thank you again.
Oh, wait a moment. I'm mistaken. I still have a slide for you, but unfortunately, I'm not.
I think it's a thank you slide, so don't worry.
No, there is also information on that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Something
Oh,
also.
yeah, this is a very important one. Okay. Yeah, so the 35th first annual conference, our Friends of First, scheduled June 4th till 9 in Canada. You don't have to go there. There's also a virtual option available. Normally, we don't make any advertisement for paid events on these CISO Tribe events, but First is, I think you all know them. It's a not-for-profit organization, and 70% of everything that they earn go back to the community. So there's a virtual option available for you to participate for only, I think it's USD 100, but even if it's a Euro 100, then I think it's a very good deal. So definitely have a look at that. And I think this was my last slide, Joseph.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Thanks. Yeah.
So this is it. Joseph, thank you again for
welcome.
your contributions. Thank you, everybody, for joining. And we're going to see you at the next one. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.